don't know what happened to the guy, but he is someone who has a hole in the center of his chest that he has to fill in every moment. And the decision he makes in every moment is what will fill this hole right now, which is why you see him saying things over hours or even over minutes that are contradictory and nonsensical.
James Comey is the former director of the FBI, a post he held from 2013 until he was fired by Donald Trump in 2017. He leaked details of meetings he'd had with the president where Trump had asked him to drop the FBI probe into a former national security advisor who was part of a wider investigation, you may remember this, into whether or not Russia had played a part in the US election. Now, since leaving that post, Comey has been vocal about the damage he believes Trump could do to his country. He said that a second administration would be a danger to all Americans and that a victorious Trump will be surrounded by those at the bottom of the barrel. James Comey has also turned his hand rather expertly to writing novels, and his second book, Westport, is a classic. Corporate crime spills out into real murder, and somebody finds themselves scapegoated for both. James Comey, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me on.
How tall are you? Let's just clear this one up for starters. 6'7", 6'8".
I don't know how your audience tracks it, but I'm 203.2 centimeters, 6 feet 8 inches.
Okay, right. Well, congratulations. We must never meet in person because between the two of us, Jane and I only top out at about 7 foot. Now, tell us a little bit about Nora in the book and the pickle that she finds herself in.
Nora is a federal prosecutor in Manhattan in the first book called Central Park West, and she's modeled on my oldest daughter, who is a federal prosecutor in Manhattan. In the second book, she leaves government work, burnt out and a little bit discouraged, and joins a gigantic hedge fund, a financial manager in the suburbs of New York, and finds herself the subject of a murder investigation. And so it's a bit of a whodunit told in a different environment than the first book. This is in the private sector.
And it's all about justice, isn't it? And it's such a fantastic kind of ploy for the reader to meet this person who has had injustice placed upon her. And we're pacing ourselves through the book, trying to hope that good will come in the end. You do say, I love the author's note at the beginning, James, about that, the difference between fact and fiction, which for you puts you under way more scrutiny than most novelists. And I wonder how often you have to check in with yourself as a writer to make sure that you are not stepping into a place where people are going to say, I recognise that person, I recognise this crime.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I have to think about it carefully for a number of reasons. When I'm writing about what happens inside the FBI, I have to ask, am I giving away official government secrets that I'm prohibited from giving away? So I have to check myself there carefully. And in the private sector, I was the chief lawyer of the world's largest hedge fund for 3 years before I went to the FBI. So I don't want to give away things I'm bound to protect as an attorney for a former client, but I also want to make it real. I'm trying to take people inside worlds that I've known and show them what they really feel like. And so it's a balance. And I actually don't mind if people who really know the insides notice some Easter eggs I've laid for them that the rest of the world won't see.
I don't think many of our listeners will really know the place that you're describing, Westport, Connecticut. So can you tell us a little bit more about it? It does play quite a key role in the wealth of the world, doesn't it?
It does. It's a wealthy suburb on the shores of the Long Island Sound, just north of New York City, so about 50 miles north of Wall Street. And it used to be 100 years ago a vacation, a place where wealthy people had their cottages. But with train service and better roads, it's become a commuter place. But it's also part of the Gold Coast of Connecticut, which is crowded with financial managers. So some of the biggest money managers in the world are there. And the one I worked for, the largest, is in Westport. And so that's where I put this fictional hedge fund.
Tell us a little bit about the greed that is involved in that world and how you, as a lawyer, and I am presuming that some of the motivation for choosing that career was to fight for truth. How do you react as a person when you're in a world that is about the accumulation of wealth predominantly?
It's a fascinating environment. I left government in 2005 during the George W. Bush administration, and I became the chief lawyer at a gigantic corporation, Lockheed Martin Corporation. And I was recruited to go to this hedge fund 5 years later by the promise that I'd get to feel what a culture that tries to root out the poisons of hierarchy and all the backstabbing that you find in large organizations. I'm sure not where you work, but other large organizations. And they said, we're trying to build a culture that's different than others, where truth is the paramount value. And I thought, that's pretty cool. I'd like to see what that's like. And it was fascinating. I'm very glad I went. I told them when I left 3 years later, I'm also very glad I left because money is not the motivator at the center of my life. And I just didn't find much joy working in a place where money was everything. A lot of very good people work there, but money is warping because for people who have a lot of money, they struggle with trying to justify it. And many of them have to tell themselves a story that I deserve it, because otherwise the cognitive dissonance is disabling. And that it's hard to live, for, at least for me, long term in a world where money is everything.
Is cognitive dissonance at the heart of the American dream, though?
Yes, it is. I mean, America is, there are two values in tension, I guess, in every country, but especially in America. One is our energy, our search for opportunity and to make your own way and to make your own money. And the other is security, that is taking care of the less fortunate, taking care of our neighbors. And there's a tension there in America. It's one of the things that makes my country both wonderful and really weird and frustrating and depressing at times.
And what's going to happen to your country in the next 6 weeks or so? What do you think the result of the election will be?
I think Kamala Harris is going to be our first female president, and I feel very good about that. I'm deeply optimistic. I think something has been unlocked, some of the enthusiasm we haven't seen in our country since Barack Obama ran in 2008. Something's been unlocked, and I think it's going to sweep her into office. It'll be closer than ever it should be. I keep remembering this line that Abraham Lincoln liked to quote at the end of our Civil War in 1865. He used to quote someone who told him, "There's always enough virtue to save America, but none to spare." And that's the way it's going to be this
Hmm.
time as well.
But how big does Kamala Harris have to win in order for Trump not to be able to challenge the election outcome? Or will he challenge it whatever?
Oh, he'll challenge it regardless. I mean, she could win all the votes, including maybe Melania's, and he would still say it had been stolen from him. That's what he is as this narcissist. He has to set it up so that he can't ever be a failure, ever be weak, ever lose. And so we're just going to have to deal with that. That is the price of Donald Trump being at the center of our national life.
So, what would the FBI be doing at the moment in preparation for that kind of spillover of Trumpism if Harris does win?
Well, they'll be trying to understand first in the run up to the election what role, if any, are foreign adversaries trying to play in manipulating the American public, and maybe, although it's very difficult to do, trying to reach the voting mechanism itself. And then they'll be trying to understand, are there acts of violence that can be discerned, needles that can be found in America's haystack of strange people, to prevent either individual acts of violence or organized acts of violence. I think there's much less chance of the kind of January 6th organized violence that we saw, but there still is a significant chance of individual violence motivated by the language in a lot of our public discourse that reaches warped
Yeah.
souls.
So obviously, we've seen two attempted assassination attempts on Donald Trump, and we have seen the effect that that's had on the FBI, and people having to no longer belong to the FBI. Do you think that we've got to the stage where actually there isn't anything that a federal department could possibly do to guarantee the safety of some people in public life?
Well, I think it can always be better. And I think the Secret Service is under-resourced and has long been under-resourced and stretched, especially during a presidential election year. But again, as you said, we're a country of 330 million people where we have more guns than people. And so finding individual threat actors, and all of whom will be armed, and trying to stop them is a very difficult mission. Frankly, it starts with the candidates themselves being more prudent. I mean, Donald Trump's habit of playing golf every day whenever he feels like it is a tremendous burden for the Secret Service.
You did talk a couple of moments ago about the level of public discourse, but also in America, in any political system, it's about the way that other departments behave. And I wonder whether you have come to regret the publication that you made whilst at the FBI about Hillary Clinton's personal emails, which definitely had an effect on her popularity as she was chasing the presidency.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I regret deeply being involved. And if I had a magic wand, I would go back and have the FBI play no role. But given that we were stuck in the middle of it, we were the ref with a whistle in our mouth in stoppage time, we had to make calls. And I still think, even after all this time, that we made the right call, the least bad call. I just wish we hadn't been involved. I don't know whether it had an effect on the election. I'm increasingly seeing arguments that it didn't, but frankly, it doesn't matter. We had to make a decision based on what we thought was the thing most consistent with the values of our institution, even though we hated being in that spot.
Did you see in your time as director of the FBI stuff that you think would actually be helpful for the public to know? It would better inform us about how our world is actually operating. It would better prepare us for some of the stuff that we are witnessing now and that undoubtedly will be coming our way in the future.
I don't think anything particularly FBI like. I saw a lot in the FBI and have since seen of our grappling in fits and starts with trying to figure out as ordinary citizens what is true. And we are stumbling our way towards a world in which we can sort that out. I'm reminded that after the invention of the printing press, it took about 200 years for the scientific method to develop and lots of other ways to deal with the torrent of falsehoods spread by printing presses. We're 20 years into this information age, and so I don't want to be too hard on us, but we have to continue to try to find ways to arrive at truth.
Where do you think America's position in the world really lies at the moment? I mean, many people have watched the unfolding situation in the Middle East, and we would value your opinion on the latest attacks with walkie talkies and with pagers. So feel free to share those with us. But perhaps we look to America and what Anthony Blinken says at the moment with more hope than we should. Is it possible for America to really de escalate a situation in the Middle East anymore?
I don't know is the honest answer. Maybe at the margins. The world was never susceptible of management in the way that you could run a small company. America remains the indispensable nation and has a really important role to play, but it can play that at the margins using the force of its money, of its stature, of its alliances. But our amazing planet is way too complicated to think that any one country can steer things reliably.
Yeah, but America sometimes acts like it can, like it believes that it can.
Yeah. Except when we're trying to thinking about electing people who want to withdraw from the world. Look, that's the tension of American history. We've always been torn between this, let's pull up the drawbridges and hide behind our oceans, or let's go out there because we can change the world. We can sow democracy around the world. Someplace between those two extremes, the extreme of pessimism and the extreme of optimism, lies a useful role for us to play in the world. We just have to play it with a sense of
Mm.
humility, which we've earned from our history.
When you're sitting in a room with Donald Trump, how do you feel?
Slightly ill to see that the person who is president of the United States has a hunger for affirmation unlike any I've ever seen in an adult before. And seeing that person in a position to make decisions that affect the lives not just of Americans, but of people around
Mm.
the world it's a difficult thing to digest, and it produces a slight sense of nausea, honestly.
So tell us a bit more about that. I mean, you've had 5 children of your own. I know you and your wife had fostered children as well. So you really know what a affirmation-seeking child might look like, I would have thought. So tell us a bit more about that.
Well, the process of growing up for all of us was realizing that the world isn't just me and my hungers and my needs and my wanting mom and dad. to tell me I'm awesome all the time. It's the process of socialization is learning that you are enmeshed in this amazing and often frustrating network of humanity where you have to help others in order to help yourself, when you have to forge alliances and bonds and connections to people to communicate effectively with them. Somehow all of that got left out of Donald Trump's upbringing. I don't know what happened to the guy, but he is someone who has a hole in the center of his chest that he has to fill in every moment. And the decision he makes in every moment is what will fill this hole right now, which is why you see him saying things over hours or even over minutes that are contradictory and nonsensical, because it's not about that. It's about filling the hole, getting you to tell me that I am wonderful. And think about being an intelligence community needing to brief the president of the United States. I mean, we wrestled with, I was only with him for 5 months, but how to get him to pay attention to what you were doing and to try and to sculpt your presentation so that it fit his view of the world, which is all about him.
You were a Republican, weren't you, before the troubles with Trump? So I imagine that you have friends, possibly family, who are still Republican. How could anybody in their right mind think that Donald Trump is the right person to lead that party? We struggle with seeing that sometimes over this side of the pond. And we're probably wrong not to ask more questions about how he is still so powerful within the party.
That's a great question. And I think at the root of it lies our fundamental misunderstanding about how people make the most important decisions in their lives, about faith or about politics. We think we are rational creatures, but our rational cognition is a latecomer to human evolution. We make decisions based on instinct, intuition, emotion. And Donald Trump has succeeded in touching those moral taste receptors of a lot of Americans in ways even they can't articulate. And he starts with an advantage. Our popular culture made Donald Trump a huge, important, and reliable figure, which is all at odds with the facts. But we made him that way through 14 years of television on his well-reviewed, well-watched program, The Apprentice. And so we put him at the center of our life. We gave him a head start like that. And he speaks in ways that resonate with a lot of Americans who feel left behind, who feel disrespected, who feel like everything is changing and we have to stop it from changing. Faith is gone, community is gone. Look at all these people who don't look like me flowing into this country. And I know my British friends deal with similar challenges in a country that's your country that's changed a lot in the last 20 years. He spoke to that in ways people can articulate, but they resonate with. And now a lot of them are trapped. The thing about a demagogue is he traps you because to get out requires you to admit something about yourself that is really hard to admit. You would think people would look at January 6th and say, I don't want any part of this. But in a way, the darker the moment, the deeper they're drawn into the demagogue's world, because it's painful to say, I made an enormous mistake. And so it's going to be closer than it should be for those reasons, but I remain deeply optimistic about America in the short run now, but especially in the long run.
And where do you think Donald Trump ends up in 10 years' time if he loses this election, if he then loses some of that political power because any call to arms that he makes doesn't actually work? Who does he become?
Well, it will ebb very slowly. That's the nature of the unwinding of a cult. The demagogue doesn't release his hold all at once. It will have to slowly leak away. And he'll still have significant influence, but at 90, he'll be standing in his bathrobe on the lawn at Mar-a-Lago shouting at cars. And some people will still listen to him, but it will slowly ebb away. But it'll be a decade before the Republican Party can decide what its future is.
That's quite some visual image, and we'll end it there. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. That's James Comey, and his second novel is out. It's called Westport. This time, the lawyer is on trial. We're rooting for
That
Nora.
was really interesting. And I just, let's just, to know that the FBI had to wrestle with how to give an intelligence briefing to the leader of the free world, who had a very short attention span and wanted everything to be about him. That it's completely boggles the mind, and people are still prepared to vote for him.
Yeah.